A single handprint, smudged, bloodied, marks the start of something sinister. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axen. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. Your voices bring this mystery to life. Let's begin. You could say the trouble started with a knock on the door and a spatula, or more precisely, with a woman holding both like they were equally dangerous weapons. It was 11:14 show, which I remember because Fritz had just finished pouring Wolfe his second bottle of beer, and I had just started pestering him about our dwindling steak supply. Now visitors before noon are about as welcome at the brownstone as moths in the orchid room, and this one didn't knock like someone delivering a polite request. It was a knock with intent, a knock that meant business. I opened the door and found myself staring at a woman in her late 30s, mid-40s, if the light was cruel, tall, thin, and precise. She was wearing a white chef's jacket, double-breasted, monogrammed in red thread. Marina Rule. In her right hand, a leather folio. In her left, a spatula. Wide-bladed, well-used, and smudged with something brown. "I'm Marina Rule," she said without smiling. "I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe. It concerns something stolen. Unless it's our time, you might stand a chance. Come in." She swept past me like a woman who's been told no before and didn't care for the taste. I led her into the front room, then gave Wolfe the kind of look you give a man who might prefer you throw the visitor out with the recycling. Wolfe didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the small brown bottle in front of him, like it might confess something. I cleared my throat theatrically. "Wolfe, this is Marina Rule. She says something's been stolen. She can say it elsewhere. I am engaged with beer." That didn't faze her. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, walking straight to the edge of the Persian rug, "I'm the executive chef at Greylands, 3 stars, 1 Michelin, and 1 disgruntled pastry chef. Last night a rare cookbook was taken from my office. This morning it was returned, but it had a handprint on the cover. I'll give the woman credit." That sentence had weight. Even Wolfe looked up. A handprint, made with demi-glace. Veal stock. Expensive. Intentional. And the book in question is irreplaceable. "I believe someone wants to send me a message." Wolfe sighed, heavier than usual. Miss Rule, I do not chase culinary ghost stories." "It's not a ghost story," she said coolly. "It's sabotage. And it's not just my reputation on the line. It's my life's work. That book isn't just rare. It's mine. I wrote it." That got my attention, and Wolfe's too. I could see it in the stillness of his fingers. She wasn't some collector with a bruised ego. She was the author of the thing. "Then call your publisher," Wolfe said. "It's unpublished." She took a slow breath and pulled the folio open. Inside was a cloth-bound volume, faded maroon, the title written by hand in looping calligraphy. On the cover, a perfect handprint. Not blood, not ink. Something thick, glossy, and distinctly brown. "I came to you because someone wanted me to be scared, and I'm not. I'm angry. If this is about stealing recipes, fine, but if it's more than that, I want to know who's behind it. And I want them stopped." Wolfe stared at the book, like it had insulted his palate. His mouth twisted. "I don't leave this house for anything less than murder. Nor for veal stock." I stepped in. "Then let me poke around. If it's nonsense, we drop it. If it isn't." Wolfe didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Marina. "You have suspects. 4, possibly 5. Every one of them works in my kitchen." "Of course they do," Wolfe muttered. He reached for the book and sniffed the cover. I watched as he raised one brow, a full 1/8 of an inch. His version of a gasp. "This is not ordinary stock. This is Espagnole. Reduced." "Exactly," Marina said. "Whoever did this knows what they're doing." That's when Wolfe said the thing I didn't expect. The thing that made me realize the week had just taken a sharp turn. "Very well, Miss Rule. I will investigate your cookbook." She gave a sharp nod, turned on her heel, and left with the quiet assurance of someone who knew the case was already hers. When the door shut, I asked him. Why? What's your angle? He took a sip of beer and said, the only thing more offensive than a ruined book is a culinary lie. One of her staff has committed both. And with that, the brownstone was officially disturbed. I gave Wolfe 5 minutes of silence before I risked speaking again. That's the magic number with him. Less, and you're a pest. More, and you're enabling. He was back to sipping beer like it was the only worthwhile liquid on earth, his eyes half closed, but twitching slightly at the corners, what I like to call the germination stage of his thinking process. That's when a seed of interest has been planted, but he hasn't yet decided whether to let it grow into a theory or squash it like a beetle on the kitchen tile. You know, I said casually, for someone who doesn't leave the house, you've got a bad habit of letting it fill up with chefs. He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he picked up the maroon folio. Marina Rule had left behind, still marked with the glossy brown handprint, and turned it over in his fingers like a relic. This is no mass-market cookbook, he murmured, more to himself than me. It is handwritten, personal, annotated. Yeah, I said, stepping closer. I took a look while you were communing with your hops. There are notes on nearly every page, some in pencil, some in fountain pen. Different inks, different moods, which suggests, he said without looking up, either it was developed over time, or someone else added their thoughts. That was Wolfe's version of a leash tug. I knew what he wanted. I'll get started, I said. But first, a question. What exactly are we looking for? A jealous sous chef, a plagiarizing saucier, someone trying to get her to pull the plug on publication. Wolfe let out a slow breath. We are looking, Archie, for the reason why someone would risk detection to tamper with a document they could have easily destroyed. Message, not malice. Precisely. I called Marina before I left. She answered on the second ring, sharp and dry, like she'd just finished giving someone a lecture on overcooked risotto. I need a list, I told her. Everyone who has access to your office, and everyone who was in the kitchen yesterday after closing. I'll send it. You coming over? Like gravy on a biscuit. She hung up without saying goodbye. I couldn't decide whether I liked her or not, which generally means I do. Grayland sat near the edge of Central Park, cloaked in the kind of subtle prestige that whispers rather than shouts. The awning out front was dark gray, stitched with the restaurant's name in black thread, chic, expensive, and just slightly ridiculous. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet for a kitchen that had seen sabotage. I'd expected nerves, maybe a few staff buzzing around like shaken bees. Instead, I was greeted by a man with the facial elasticity of a statue and the voice of a funeral director. Miss Rule is in the office, he said. Down the hall, second door left. I walked past a gleaming dining room and into a corridor that smelled faintly of saffron and bleach. The office was small but neat, walls lined with shelves of cookbooks and folders, a corkboard cluttered with clipped articles and diagrams of plating layouts that looked like they'd been stolen from a modern art museum. Marina stood behind her desk, arms folded. She didn't offer me a seat. I emailed you the names, she said. 5 staff members had both opportunity and access. All kitchen, all close to me. Define close. I trust them. Or I did. She handed me a thin manila folder. These are their bios, their work histories, schedules for the last 3 days. My kitchen runs on precision. That includes behavior. I opened the folder and gave it a glance. Marina wasn't joking. Each suspect came with more documentation than a tax audit. Photos, resume highlights, even personality notes. It was either very helpful or very unsettling, possibly both. Give me a quick rundown, I said. In your own words. She leaned on the desk and counted off on her fingers. First, Nico de Groot. My sous chef, Belgian. Brilliant palate. A temper like paprika. He believes he should be running his own kitchen by now. And he's probably right. Second, Clara Voss. Pastry chef. Methodical, exacting, and cold. She once reduced an intern to tears because they folded a napkin the wrong way. We haven't been getting along lately. Third, Marco Jenks, grill station. Young, ambitious, and always lurking. He's asked to look at the manuscript more than once. I always said no. Fourth, Ginny Pelham, garde-manger. Quiet, observant, too observant. She's the kind who knows who's sleeping with whom before the sleeping starts. And fifth, I asked, Cecil, my business partner. He handles marketing, numbers, and sponsors. No kitchen role, but he's been pushing me to sell the rights to the book for 6 months. I refused. He didn't like that. I took notes with one hand and kept the other on my hip. So you've got 3 potential chefs with skill, motive, and access. A marketer with an agenda, and a pastry chef with a vendetta over laminated dough. She didn't smile. Who found the book? I asked. I did. I came in at 7, as usual. It was back on my desk, but that handprint wasn't there when I left. And who locked up last night? Nico. That pinged something. Would he have a key? All senior staff do. That's standard. I nodded. All right. I'll want to speak to all of them. Separately. You'll need to be careful. Kitchens are like submarines. Everyone's stuck in tight quarters, and one spark starts a fire. Thanks for the poetry, I said. Now point me to the galley. I spent the next 2 hours interviewing suspects between prep work and breaks, always pretending to be a visiting food consultant. It's amazing what people will say when they think you're the guy who might recommend them for a television show. Nico de Groot was all sharp angles and faster speech than a man with knives should possess. He bristled when I brought up the manuscript. Of course I wanted to read it, he snapped. But only to learn, to understand her process. I respect Marina. I would never steal from her. Still, I said, you had the keys, and I locked up. Yes, but you'll find nothing missing. No security breach. His indignation didn't feel rehearsed, but indignation rarely does. Clara Voss was the exact opposite, icy, clipped, barely speaking above a whisper. I do not cook with veal stock, she said simply. That is a waste of an animal's dignity. That's refreshingly militant. She looked at me as if I'd spoken in emoji. Marco Jenks tried too hard to be casual. His grin was a smidge wide, his hands too busy. I'd kill to read that book. Figuratively, he added quickly. But I wouldn't touch her stuff. That's career suicide. Unless you wanted a new career. He shrugged. Chefs change kitchens like socks. Ginny Pelham blinked at me behind large glasses, then offered one of the more coherent observations of the day. Whoever did it wanted Marina to react, she said. Not be harmed, not robbed, just shaken. You sound like you know something. I notice things. People talk when they think you're invisible. Who talks most when you're invisible? She smiled faintly. Cecil. That left me with one more stop. I found Cecil in the wine cellar, reorganizing labels with the fury of a man avoiding confrontation. Did you touch the book? I asked. He looked up sharply. No, but you wanted her to sell it. Yes. Still do. It's genius, and it's just sitting there. Why bury it? Because it's hers. He gave me a look I didn't love. Marina creates art, but she doesn't understand business. That book could be worth a fortune. It's not betrayal, it's vision. By the time I got back to the brownstone, my notebook was full, my feet were sore, and my head was humming with crossed timelines and clashing egos. Wolfe was in the office, surrounded by orchids and the scent of lunch. Well, he said. They're all candidates, I said. And every one of them has a reason. But Ginny, she's the quiet one. The one who listens. She said the act wasn't meant to hurt. It was meant to send a signal. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Yes, he said. Which means the next message will not be a handprint. What then? Something less decorative. Something that makes the intention unmistakable. He tapped the edge of the folio. We must watch the next move, Archie, closely. because it will not be long. And that was the first time I felt the temperature in the room drop a little. Not because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't yet. Wolfe didn't sleep on the matter. He brooded, which for him meant silence broken only by the rustle of a newspaper or the chime of cutlery against porcelain. The next day passed without incident, unless you count Wolfe snapping at Fritz for using a younger mustard green than strictly necessary. I knew better than to press him. When Wolfe didn't speak, he was sifting, not facts. Those were beneath him, but significance. I, on the other hand, had a schedule to keep, and a second round of suspects to prod. There were threads in that kitchen that hadn't finished unraveling, and if someone was planning to escalate, I wanted to be on the right street corner when the fireworks started. I started with Ginny. Again, we met at a coffee place 2 blocks from Greylands. She sat with her back to the wall, stirring a tea she didn't drink. No apron today, just a faded green sweater and the nervous energy of a person too used to being overlooked. I shouldn't be talking to you outside of work, she said. If Marina finds out, she won't, I said, unless you give me something worth reporting. That earned me a flicker of something, either humor or disdain. You said the handprint wasn't meant to harm her. Why? She paused, then reached into her purse and pulled out a photo, folded once across the middle. It showed a kitchen, a different one, smaller, humbler, and in the center stood Marina, maybe 10 years younger, with an arm around a beaming woman, Clara Voss. Hair shorter, face younger, smile brighter. They weren't just colleagues, Ginny said. Clara and Marina opened their first place together, 4 years before Greylands. It was called Voss and Rule. Never made it past 18 months. Why? No one says, just. It broke. Marina moved on. Clara vanished. And now Clara's back. No explanation. No interviews. And Marina pretends none of it ever happened. I pocketed the photo. Any reason someone might want the book published less than Cecil wants it published more? Ginny nodded. The book, it's a blend. Recipes, yes, but also memories, reflections. Marina calls it the flavor of silence. Half cookbook, half confessional. If someone did something they regret, and they thought Marina might have written it down, she didn't finish the sentence and she didn't have to. Back at the brownstone, I dropped the photo in front of Wolfe like it was a court summons. He studied it without touching it. Your thoughts, Archie? I think Clara Voss didn't come back for a paycheck. I think she's guarding something. Or, Wolfe said, ensuring something is left out. He picked up the photo with the tips of his fingers. We must determine what Clara believes is in that manuscript. And whether she's correct. Want me to try to get a look inside it? He shook his head. No, that would violate Miss Rule's trust. And more importantly, insult her pride. A better tack would be to let the adversary try again. You're expecting a second signal? I am counting on it. And he was right. The second signal arrived that same night, and it wasn't decorative. It was a fire. Marina called at 2:17 a.m., which is a time Wolfe finds unacceptable under any circumstance. I answered before the second ring, and her voice came through flat and ragged. There was a fire. In my office. It was put out quickly. But the book, my book is gone. That woke Wolfe up faster than coffee and an insult. By 3 a.m., I was standing outside Greylands, under a flickering street lamp, while the fire marshal took notes and Marina Rule stood off to the side in a black trench coat, her hands jammed deep in her pockets. The door to her office was blackened at the edges. Smoke still curled up through the frame like a bad omen. The damage wasn't extensive. A trash bin had been lit, probably with kitchen matches. A desk drawer had been jimmied open. Most of the damage was cosmetic, but the manuscript, the original handwritten draft of The Flavor of Silence, was missing. I locked it up before I left, she said, eyes fixed on the soot-lined door. I always do. Any security footage? She shook her head. Cecil was supposed to install cameras in the back hallway 3 weeks ago. Said the quote was too high. That made me wonder how high he'd go to make a profit off a scandal. The fire marshal finished his report and left. Marina didn't speak. I followed her inside, into the scorched shell of her office, and for a moment we both just stood there, like mourners at an open casket. "I'll tell Wolfe," I said finally. "He'll want to know everything." She nodded once. "Tell him this wasn't vandalism. This was erasure." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was already dressed, well, as dressed as he ever gets before noon, and was waiting in the office with the curtains drawn. He listened in silence, then tapped a finger on the armrest of his chair. "This changes the premise," he said. "You think it's no longer a warning. I think it was never merely that. It is now an operation. A controlled burn to remove a specific risk." "So the handprint was bait?" "No," Wolfe said. "The handprint was fear. The fire was desperation." That's when I saw the idea form behind his eyes, like a candle catching in the dark. "Archie, call Saul. Have him find out where Clara Voss lived before she returned to New York, and with whom. Then ask Fred Durkin to follow Cecil. Discreetly. You think one of them torched the place. I think one of them failed to prevent it." Saul got back to us before noon. Clara Voss had spent the past 3 years in Vermont. Small town, population under 5,000. 2 bakeries, no press to speak of. She worked at a retreat center, no forward-facing role, and kept to herself. But 3 weeks before she came to Greylands, she was seen in a New York restaurant with a literary agent. Saul even got the name, Nadine Kessler. A call to her office didn't go far. But Wolfe had me call again, pretending to be a fact-checker from Bon Appetit. That got me through. "Yes, Clara Voss brought me a manuscript," Nadine said. "But it wasn't hers." "Whose was it?" "I assumed it was co-authored. She said it needed to be protected. I skimmed it. It was bold, intimate. More than just food. Was it the flavor of silence?" There was a long pause. "Yes, that was the title." I thanked her and hung up. Wolfe closed his eyes for a full 10 seconds. "She copied the book." "Not just copied," I said. "She tried to shop it." He nodded, but feared retribution or exposure. So she returned to Greylands to control the narrative, to monitor Marina, and perhaps to stop publication altogether. And when the handprint didn't work, she, or someone she enlisted, opted for fire. I paced the room. So we've got motive. Clara steals the manuscript. Marina won't sell. Clara fears being outed as a thief. Meanwhile, Cecil's sniffing around for $signs. And someone lights a match. "Yes," Wolfe said. "Now summon them, all of them, to this office. Even Marina, especially Marina." He leaned back. "We will dine in truth tonight, Archie. Though the main course may prove difficult to swallow. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is when I knew the office chairs were about to get crowded, and the lies about to get roasted, the lies about to get roasted, the lies about..." At precisely 7:30 that evening, Wolfe's office was primed for confrontation. Chairs arranged, windows shut tight, and the air so heavy with orchid humidity you could carve it with a bread knife. Fritz had been dispatched to the kitchen with strict orders to hold dinner until further notice, which meant we were all officially entering the danger zone. The guest list arrived in staggered formation. First was Cecil, carrying a briefcase and a face like a man attending a tax audit. Then Marco, hands in his pockets and a default smirk barely hiding his nerves. Clara followed in silence, giving no nods, no greetings, just that glacial stillness of hers. Nico came last, jaw tight, knuckles even tighter, and 5 minutes late as promised came Marina. She wore gray slacks and a red sweater, and looked every inch the commanding chef, even if her eyes were sharper now, hard, like a blade that had been left too long in the fire. Wolfe remained in his chair, of course, barely acknowledging their arrival. When all were seated, and the rustling had stopped, he opened his eyes. "I dislike repetition," he said, "but I dislike ignorance even more. Therefore allow me to recap for clarity, not for drama." He gestured to the side table, where the maroon folio sat under glass, retrieved from Marina's office before the fire. Thanks to Fritz's daily cleaning habit, and Wolfe's fondness for possession. "This book," Wolfe continued, "is an unpublished manuscript, part memoir, part cookbook, written by Miss Rule. It contains recipes, yes, but also impressions, confessions, memory reduced and clarified to essence. Hickel let that hang a moment, then shifted his eyes toward Clara. Miss Voss, you were seen with a literary agent 3 weeks before your return to Greylands. You presented her with a manuscript titled, The Flavor of Silence. Explain. Clara didn't blink. I found the book. I brought it to her because I believed it should be protected. Marina had abandoned it. Abandoned it? Marina said sharply. You're out of your mind. I was editing it. It was in my locked drawer. You told no one. You kept it hidden. Secrets aren't recipes, Marina. They go bad when left too long. That's rich coming from you, Marina snapped. Clara finally turned to face her. You never wanted to tell the truth about what we did, what we built. You just wanted the food without the failure. I was part of that story. You erased me. Wolfe raised a hand, not abruptly, but with enough weight to settle the air. Regardless of grievances, he said, you misappropriated the work of another and attempted to pass it along as publishable content. Whether or not you meant to claim authorship, you assumed the right to decide its fate. I was protecting her, Clara said softly. No, Wolfe corrected. You were protecting yourself. He turned now to Cecil. Mr. Quinn, you were told to install security cameras. You did not. You claimed the quote was too high, yet the financial logs reveal no actual quote was requested. Why? Cecil's eyes narrowed, then darted, left, then down, then back again. I didn't think they were necessary. But the book's value, Wolfe said, was clear to you. Yes, so you chose a condition of vulnerability, hoping perhaps that something would occur which would force Miss Rule's hand. Cecil opened his mouth, closed it, then muttered, I just wanted her to see it made sense to sell. She's sitting on a gold mine. And for what? Principle. Indeed, Wolfe said, a troublesome substance. Wolfe leaned back now, eyes drifting shut, for a brief moment. Everyone fidgeted. The office had become an oven. Not from heat, but from pressure. And now, Wolfe said, opening his eyes again, we arrive at the fire. He pointed a single finger, straight at Nico. You locked up the night of the handprint. You had the only key used that evening. Nico stiffened. Yes, and I locked everything. The kitchen, the office. I didn't go near the drawer, yet you knew it held the manuscript. Everyone knew, Marco cut in. We all saw her writing in it. Some of us more than others. Wolfe didn't look at Marco, but his tone cooled further. Mr. Jenks, did you take it? No. Did you attempt to? Marco's silence stretched 3 seconds too long. No. Then why, Wolfe said, was your fingerprint on the back cover? Marco froze. What? I had Mr. Goodwin lift prints from the folio before placing it under glass. Your fingerprint matches a print on file from a previous arrest for breaking and entering. You reached for the book. You handled it. Marco's lips twitched. Okay, I touched it. Once, after hours. I was curious. Why lie? I was afraid you'd pin it on me, Wolfe muttered. We do not pin here. We extract. He looked around the room slowly, methodically. One of you took the book. One of you set a fire to hide the theft. But only one of you had both means and motive, and the gall to destroy what you could not claim. He turned, finally, to Clara Voss. You feared exposure. You feared Marina publishing her version of events. You feared her truth. So you decided to remove it. I didn't light the fire, Clara said quietly. No, Wolfe agreed. You did not. You had someone else do it. He turned to Cecil. Cecil's voice cracked before Wolfe even finished the movement. She begged me, said the book would ruin them both. You set the fire, Marina said, her voice sharp as shrapnel. I didn't mean to hurt anything, Cecil said, hands up. I just wanted to scare you. Stop the publication. Clara said. She lied, Marina said. Clara stood now. No. I told him what I believed. that the book would tear apart what little peace we had left. I didn't expect him to set a fire. Wolfe lifted a hand again. Enough. I require no confession. Mr. Goodwin has already spoken with the fire marshal. Mr. Quinn, your fingerprints are on the matchbook retrieved from the trash. Combined with motive and testimony, you will be charged with arson. Cecil slumped. Clara didn't move. Marina stared at her for a long time. You didn't want the truth, she said. You wanted your version. But I won't rewrite it for you. Wolfe let out a breath. Miss Rule, the book is intact. Mr. Goodwin recovered it before the fire. Her shoulders dropped half an inch, relief maybe, or exhaustion. That's why I came to you, she said to Wolfe. I knew someone would try to bury it. He nodded. They failed. She turned and left without another word. Clara followed. Nico and Marco exchanged glances and slipped out. Cecil lingered for a moment longer, then left too, escorted by me and a promise of police contact. Back in the office, Wolfe finally exhaled. Fritz, he called. Dinner. I shut the door. You sure you don't want to write a cookbook someday? I asked. The philosophy of butter, how to braise the human condition. Wolfe didn't dignify that with a reply. He lifted his beer, sipped, and said simply, Truth, Archie, is like sauce. Left too long it curdles, but handled properly, it reveals everything. And with that, the office was once again filled with silence and the scent of justice served warm. The next morning began with bacon, thick cut, properly crisped, the way Fritz makes it when he suspects the household requires morale support. Wolfe was already in the dining room, chewing with the meditative intensity of a man dismantling a conspiracy with his molars. I slid into my chair, poured a cup of coffee, and let the silence hang for a minute before I brought up the obvious. So, that's it. Wolfe didn't look up. Do you wish for something more, Archie? A second arson? A confession rendered in flambe? I wouldn't mind a twist, I said. Just one little wrinkle. The case wrapped up neat, too neat. That got his attention. His brow lifted by what I'd estimate as 3/16 of an inch. You have misgivings? I have instincts. Then use them, he said. But don't let them overstep the facts. He stabbed a piece of sausage with his fork and returned to the serious business of breakfast. I took that as permission to go poking. The truth was, something had been bothering me since last night. Something I didn't want to say in front of Marina, or Clara, or Wolfe with his executioner voice on. When we'd revealed the book had been saved from the fire, Clara hadn't even flinched. Not a gasp, not a scowl, just cool resignation, as if she'd already known, or worse, hadn't cared. That's not the reaction you expect from someone whose entire sabotage campaign just failed. And then there was Cecil. He confessed to arson, sure. But when pressed on motive, his words had been borrowed, parroted, clear as fear, clear as logic, clear as voice. But was it her plan? I finished breakfast and told Wolfe I was heading back to Greylands. He didn't protest. When I got there, the restaurant was closed for the day, but I had Marina's code. She'd sent it after the fire, along with a 2-word text. Use judgment. The place was quiet, sun slanting in through the tall front windows, the kitchen half lit with the glow of fridge panels and stainless steel. I went straight for her office. The door had been repaired, fresh paint, new lock. Inside, the manuscript sat in a sealed case on her desk, under a museum-grade acrylic dome. Wolfe would have approved. I stood there for a moment just staring at it. And then I reached for the chair, pulled it out, and sat. Not to snoop. To think, if Clara hadn't flinched, and Cecil had acted like a man set up to burn his own reputation for someone else's fear, then maybe the plan hadn't been Clara's. Maybe someone else had everything to gain by seeing the book disappear. That's when the thought hit me like a dropped pan. The person with the most to lose wasn't Clara. It wasn't Cecil. It was Marco. Young, ambitious Marco Jenks. The one who'd asked Marina multiple times to read the manuscript. The one who claimed to have touched it just once. The one whose fingerprints conveniently were on the back cover. Too conveniently. I stood up fast enough to knock over the chair, and went to the walk-in fridge. Ginny was there, sorting herbs with surgical care. She didn't jump when I came in. "I need your help," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "You said you notice things. Good. What have you noticed about Marco?" She gave me a long look. "Then he's always near people when they're talking about things they shouldn't be, but he never adds anything." Has he been close to Cecil? Closer than before. Quiet conversations in the hallway. Twice last week. They'd stop talking when someone entered the room. And Clara, only in public. He pretends not to like her. Overcompensates. Do you think he knew about the manuscript? I think he read it. That did it. I made 2 phone calls, one to Wolfe, the other to Saul Panzer. "Saul," I said, "I need you to find out where Marco Jenks was the night of the fire, and what he's been searching for online the past 6 months." Wolfe's response, when I relayed my theory, was succinct, plausible. Proceed. It took Saul less than a day. Marco, it turned out, had taken a trip to New Haven 2 weeks prior, claimed he was visiting a cousin. But Saul found no cousin, just a bookstore specializing in rare culinary texts. He'd asked to speak to a man named Gerard Lang, who handled unpublished manuscripts and chef-authored content. The meeting had lasted 37 minutes. No purchases, no contact since. And Marco's online footprint. Predictable. Searches for how to value unpublished cookbook, literary agent's cookbook, ghostwriting chef memoirs, and my personal favorite, can you legally sell a recipe someone else created? I asked Saul to meet me outside Greylands at 6 p.m., just before dinner service. Wolfe gave his blessing. And by blessing, I mean a grunt and a flick of the hand. At exactly 6:03, Marco came out for a smoke. I stepped beside him. Saul followed 10 seconds later. We didn't block him, didn't threaten. Just stood, close, like shadows that ask questions. Marco flinched. "What do you want?" I smiled. "Just some clarification about why you traveled to New Haven, and why you searched for literary rights laws on a shared terminal." His face went pale. "I didn't set the fire," he said. "No," I said. "You got someone else to. You nudged Cecil just enough, fed him just enough. You planted the print on the folio so we'd suspect you a little, but not too much. Just enough to throw heat on you so Clara would look more guilty by contrast. That way, even if things blew up, no one would think you had a plan." That's insane. "No. It's tactical. You wanted that manuscript sold, but not by Marina. You wanted to leak it, profit from it, maybe even ghostwrite a cleaned-up version under someone else's name." He looked to Saul. "You can't prove any of that." Saul smiled. "We can prove you met a buyer, that you sent a digital sample." That stopped him cold. We hadn't known that. But Marco didn't know we hadn't. He swallowed hard. "What happens now?" he asked. "Wolfe wants to see you." "I'd advise you don't lie." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe sat in his chair, with the sort of calm that suggested he was already bored by Marco's presence. "Young man," he said, "I do not care about your ambition, nor your opportunism. What I object to is cowardice. Had you been bold enough to steal the book outright, I might have begrudged you some intelligence, but your method, manipulation, planted evidence, the exploitation of others' guilt is vile. Worse, it is stupid." Marco said nothing. "Mr. Goodwin has extracted your confession. Mr. Panzer has preserved your communications. You will return the digital sample to Miss Rule, and you will resign." Still, Marco said nothing. He left with his head down. After the door shut, Wolfe turned to me. "There. Now it's finished. You think Marina will forgive Clara?" I asked. "No. You think she should?" Wolfe closed his eyes. "That," he said, "is not cuisine. That is digestion." I nodded and stood. "Dinner, then." He sighed. "Yes, Archie, at last." And with that, justice was served again, this time with roast duck and black cherry sauce. By the time we'd finished dinner, Duck-a-la Fritz, glistening and cut with a knife so sharp it hummed. I was feeling mildly triumphant and entirely full. Wolfe was silent for nearly 15 minutes, savoring both the food and, I suspect, the rare pleasure of having been proven right, not once but twice. First in exposing Clara and Cecil, and again with Marco's failed double-cross. The brownstone had held the line, as always. Still, something itched at the back of my mind. You get used to the aftermath in this business. The police formalities, the stunned apologies, the radio silence from those who swore they'd never forgive you for unearthing the truth. But this one felt unfinished. Not unsolved, but unsettled, like a perfectly arranged dish with one wrong garnish. So when Wolfe leaned back with his post-dinner beer and said, "Archie, let the matter be concluded," I did what any self-respecting assistant with a hunch would do. I ignored him. The next morning I stopped by Greylands again, not because I expected gratitude or closure, but because my instinct still had a pulse. I found Marina in the prep kitchen, gloves on, a crate of chanterelles in front of her. Her movements were mechanical, precise, practiced but cold. "You're early," she said, not looking up. "I'm restless." She snorted. "Join the club." We stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the click of knives and the hum of refrigeration. "I came to ask a question," I said. "Something small, might not mean anything." Marina glanced up. "Then why bother?" "Because Wolfe says I should know when to leave a thing alone, which usually means I've missed something." That got a half smile. "You didn't miss much, Goodwin. You saw it before I did. I'd still be doubting Clara if not for you." I nodded slowly. "About Clara, what happens now?" "She's gone. Left this morning. Said she had a train. No forwarding address. And Cecil. I imagine he'll be charged. Wolfe said he wouldn't block it, but Wolfe also said I should make the decision. And I haven't. That wasn't what I was expecting." Marina Rule, who dressed down sous chefs for misjudging tarragon, was hesitating. "She betrayed you," I said. "No," she corrected. "She disappointed me. There's a difference." I liked that line so much I nearly wrote it down. Then I said, "There's one more thing." Marina looked up, clearly annoyed now. "Humor me," I said. "The original handprint was at Vealstock or Espagnole." She blinked. "Espagnole, reduced." "Why?" "Because Wolfe knew that." "Smelled it," he said. "But when we checked your pantry, the Espagnole was untouched, not opened." Fritz confirmed. Marina went still. "Now that leaves two possibilities. Either someone brought their own Espagnole, which seems unlikely for an impromptu intimidation tactic, or the source came from somewhere outside your kitchen." Her voice was low now. "Where?" "Clara never went near the main stove. Marco never had the nerve. Nico would have done something louder. Cecil couldn't cook to save his life." She nodded slowly. So there's only one person in that kitchen who knew where you used to keep the old test sauces, the private stash. Back in Vossen Rule." Marina stared at me. "Ginny." Marina took a step back. "You're wrong. She's harmless." "No one's harmless," I said. "Just underestimated." She shook her head. "She was loyal. She stayed late, helped me rewrite 3 chapters, never asked for anything." "That's the point," I said. "She wanted something you weren't offering." I handed Marina a printed page. Wolfe had pulled it from Ginny's online portfolio, one she deleted 2 weeks ago. A short essay, "The Invisible Palette, a Kitchen Memoir." The subtitle, "What They Remember Isn't Always What You Made." Marina read it. Then again, the color drained from her face. "She wrote this. She wrote about this, the manuscript, the betrayal, the fire. It's all there, veiled, sure, but unmistakable if you know the players. She was in the kitchen that night. She had access. She lit the match," I said, "not to destroy the book, to smoke it out, to force the story into the open." Marina dropped the page on the counter. She thought I'd ignore it, that I'd publish without her. "No," I said. She thought you'd bury it. The way you buried Clara. The way you buried your past. She didn't want your fame. She wanted your truth. Marina leaned on the counter. God help me, I think she was right. You're going to confront her. She's gone, Marina said. Left this morning. Quietly. No goodbye. I gave a short laugh. Always the quiet ones. She nodded. They see everything. I started for the door. Mr. Goodwin, she called. I turned. Tell Wolfe. Thank you. And tell him he was wrong. About what? There was a twist. There was a twist. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms with Theodore, whispering sweet nothings to a Miltonia orchid with drooping leaves. I waited in the office until he emerged precisely at 4 o'clock, still smelling faintly of moss and bark mulch. Well, he said, easing into his chair. You were wrong, I told him. He raised an eyebrow. There was a third party, not Clara, not Cecil, Ginny Pelham. He blinked once. She lit the fire. He asked, not to destroy the book, to expose the tension. She knew it would flush out the truth. Knew Marco, Clara, Cecil, they'd all scramble. She wanted the story told honestly. She wanted Marina to stop hiding. Wolfe leaned back. Motivated by what? Recognition. Not fame. Just a place at the table. He let that sit for a long moment. Do we inform the authorities? No damage, no theft, no injury, just smoke and metaphor. Wolfe gave a small grunt. Then let the embers cool. I went to the cabinet and poured myself a finger of Wolfe's brandy. He didn't protest. You're not upset someone slipped past you? He closed his eyes. Archie. I admire competence, even when it's inconvenient. And Marina? She must decide whether truth is a recipe or a confession. I sipped. Do you want to read the manuscript? I asked. She said she might send us a copy. Wolfe opened one eye. If she serves it, he said, I'll taste. And that, as far as Wolfe was concerned, was the final course. Later that evening, Fritz served a chestnut bisque with shavings of black truffle and a brioche, so delicate it could have floated. Wolfe ate in silence, then leaned back with a long, satisfied sigh. Justice, he murmured, is a dish best served warm. But truth is better slightly overcooked. Less palatable, perhaps, but safer to digest. I raised my glass. To digestion. He didn't toast back, but he did reach for a second helping. And in this house, that's as close as we get to applause. It was raining the next morning, a slow, persistent drizzle that made New York feel like someone had forgotten to wring it out properly. The windows of the brownstone wore little rivulets of gray, and Wolfe was in his chair before 9, rare for a man who considered sunrise an affront. He declared that the orchids required reclassification after Theodore made a rash change to the Vanda grouping. Apparently the botanical world was just as cutthroat as the culinary one. I had no such lofty pursuits. I was at my desk, rereading my notes from the week. Everything from the sauce-stained folio to the fire, to Ginny's silent escape. The case was over, officially, the mess cleaned, but something kept needling me, and by 10 o'clock I figured it wasn't going away. Wolfe, I said, you know what still doesn't sit right? You, he grunted, eyes on the orchid chart. Besides me. It's Marina. Not what she did, what she didn't do. He lowered the page 1 inch, which in Wolfe terms is the equivalent of a gasp. She never asked us to follow up. Never asked what we learned about Ginny. Never demanded proof or revenge. She just accepted it. She had what she needed, Wolfe said. The fire clarified her truth. Clara's betrayal forced her hand. That is all. Except it isn't, I said. You know why? Because she didn't push back. Not once. And that's not like her. She was fire and ice from day one. But the minute Ginny's name came up, she folded. She didn't even act surprised. Wolfe looked at me now, properly. You believe she knew. I think she suspected. Maybe not consciously. But she's not dumb. She knew the flavor of that sauce, Wolfe. That Espagnole, it wasn't generic. It was hers. Her technique. Her balance. The one she taught Ginny. Wolfe leaned back, fingertips pressed. You believe she allowed it? I think she allowed herself to believe it was someone else, until it was no longer possible. And then she chose silence. Not to protect Ginny, but to protect the narrative. The story she wants to tell. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. So we are back to concealment. Only now, it's deliberate. That was enough to shift Wolfe's mood from orchid irritation to what I call predatory repose. His voice went soft. Do you believe Miss Rule staged this? No, I said, but I believe she curated it. At noon, I made a detour to the Upper West Side and waited outside a publishing house that Wolfe's bookbinder had once referred to as the literary slaughterhouse of dreams. It was modest from the outside, 3 floors, oak-framed doors, and an inordinate number of designer scarves inside. But I wasn't there for the decor. I was there for Nadine Kessler. It took charm, 2 white lies, and a forged appointment slip, but I eventually found myself across from her desk. She was sipping an espresso the size of a thimble and typing with the aggression of a court stenographer during a mob trial. I waited until she looked up. Goodwin, she said. Detective or writer? Both, depending on the paycheck. You hear about Clara's manuscript again. Close. I'm here about what came after. Did Marina Rule contact you recently? Nadine blinked. She emailed me 2 nights ago. Did she mention Ginny Pelham? No. Why would she? I handed her a folded sheet of paper. It was a draft of a press release Wolfe had intercepted, an early pitch sent to a PR firm we knew through Saul. The title, The Flavor of Silence, a new culinary memoir by Marina Rule, with contributions by G. Nadine raised an eyebrow. GP, that's Ginny. Was. She's gone now, but she'll still get credit, quiet credit. Marina's way of saying I'll include you but you don't get a seat at the table. Nadine frowned. That's calculated. That's Marina. She handed back the paper. Is there a problem? No. Just wanted to confirm the game board before Wolfe made a move. And what's his move? I smiled. To do nothing, but loudly. That evening, back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the update. She's rewriting the manuscript, including Ginny now. Minimally, symbolically. But it's there. She's building a new story, but this time she gets to be the narrator and the editor. Wolfe was quiet. Then, she has accepted the terms of betrayal. But she will not admit them. Would you? No, Wolfe said. But I would not claim to be honest while doing so. We let that linger. Then Wolfe said something I didn't expect. She is more dangerous than Clara. How so? She does not need to lie. She simply chooses what to remember. The following week brought final confirmations. Marco had left New York, nursing his ego in what he described as a temporary creative exile in Portland. Clara had vanished into the ether, forwarding a letter to Marina through Saul in which she apologized for misjudging the temperature of the kitchen. No one laughed. Cecil took a plea deal, probation, a fine, and Wolfe's sternest scowl. His food blog, Cecil Eats Manhattan, shut down within 48 hours. As for Ginny, there was no sign. No forwarding address, no social media update, no awkward message of gratitude or recrimination. She had, as Wolfe said, retreated into her legend. The ghostwriter behind the flame. The manuscript. Marina's publisher announced the upcoming release for spring. The Flavor of Silence, Notes from a Kitchen War. The subtitle alone caused a 4-way bidding war for international rights. Wolfe refused to read the advanced copy. When I asked why, he said, I do not consume filtered truth, Archie. Not for profit. But when the publisher sent over a box of advanced promotional items, including a bottle of Marina's signature reduction sauce, he sniffed it once, then muttered, too much shallot. I took that as a sign of closure. One night, maybe a week after the dust had settled, I came into the office around 9 to find Wolfe staring into space. You thinking about the case? I asked. He nodded slowly. The structure, not the outcome. Anything not hold up? No, he said. It holds, but imperfectly, like a sauce held too long. The separation begins beneath the surface. I sat down across from him, bottle of beer in one hand. You think Marina wins? Of course, she always did. She turned her kitchen into a crucible, then claimed the only surviving story. She earned it, didn't she? Yes, he said. But so did Ginny. He closed his eyes. History, Archie, is not written by the victors. It is written by the survivors with the best penmanship. I tilted my bottle toward him. To the survivors, then. He didn't clink his glass, but he nodded. And in Wolfe's world, that's a standing ovation. A week later, the cookbook arrived. It came by courier, a thick cream-colored package, tied with twine, more wedding invitation than publishing artifact. No note inside. Just the book, freshly printed, cover matte, spine embossed in red foil. The flavor of silence. Notes from a kitchen war by Marina Rule. Beneath the title, in faint gray script, were the words, with reflections by G. I left it on Wolfe's desk. He didn't touch it for 2 days. On the third morning he picked it up without comment, flipped once through the index, then the introduction, then the back jacket copy. After precisely 13 minutes, he shut the book, set it beside his beer, and said, disingenuous, "That's the review?" He grunted. Self-preservation parading as honesty. A common genre. I sat on the edge of my desk. She told the truth. Some of it. Worse, Wolfe said. She chose which truth? I shrugged. Don't we all? Wolfe didn't answer. He had closed his eyes again. And that, I thought, would be the end of it. Case closed, book published, damage measured, and metabolized. But Wolfe, as ever, had a longer memory than most. A few days later, Fritz found something unusual tucked inside one of our mail orders. A small envelope with no return address, wedged between invoices from orchid suppliers and a culinary journal Wolfe had ceased subscribing to in 1997, but still received out of spite. The envelope was off-white, unsealed. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, blocky script. Female, you were right. About the fire. About the silence. Some truths aren't written. Some are cooked. I left a note once in a spice jar. She never found it, but you did. In your own way. Wajud. Wolfe read it twice. Then he folded it, tucked it inside a dictionary volume of Webster's Unabridged, and said nothing. I was the one who finally spoke. She wanted to be found, didn't she? Yes, Wolfe said. But only by someone who wouldn't come looking. I made a pot of coffee, and let the office settle into the rhythm it always found after a storm. Quiet, orderly, a little heavier than before. Then I broke the spell. You know, it still bothers me. He raised one brow. Marina's book, I said. She doesn't lie. But she never says it outright. Not about Clara, not about Cecil, and definitely not about Ginny. She says what must be said, Wolfe replied, and omits what the world is not brave enough to digest. That's a neat trick. It's an old one. Writers and cooks alike have always edited for the palate. I paused, leaned back, then said, You ever wonder if we're doing the same thing? He looked at me sharply. I write up the cases. You dictate, correct, embellish where needed. Correct, he interrupted. Not embellish. Fine. But the point is, we shape it. The story, the players, the meaning. Isn't that the same game Marina played? Wolfe's mouth tightened. No, he said. We report conclusions, not convictions. Marina reports sentiment. I let that sit. You know, I said, you just gave her a better blurb than her publisher did. He ignored that. Later that evening, I called Marina. She answered on the second ring. Did you get it? She asked. We did. And he called it disingenuous. She laughed, a low, dry sound like flame catching on oil. I figured, but he read it. Didn't he? He did. She paused. That's enough. I almost hung up, but something made me stay. You never told her, did you, Ginny? Yeah. Marina sighed. No, I didn't have to. She told you. Not in words, but I could taste it. I let that sit a moment. You knew before the fire, I knew after. But I wasn't ready to admit what it meant. Not then. And now, she was quiet. Now I wish I'd asked her to stay. That wasn't the story you wanted. No, she agreed. But it might have been the one I needed. That was the last time we spoke. The book went on to sell modestly well enough for a second printing, a few interviews, and an awkward podcast appearance, where Marina clearly wanted to say more and said less instead. Clara didn't surface. Marco, last I heard, was trying to host a cooking segment on a local news channel in Oregon under a new name. Cecil wrote an apology piece for a food magazine and disappeared shortly after. And Ginny? She never reappeared, at least not where we could see. But every now and then a quiet entry would surface on a little-known blog or a specialty food journal, signed only GP, thoughtful, biting, precise. Always unsigned, always significant. Wolfe, read every one. Without comment. Then months later, a package arrived. No return address. Handwritten again. Inside, wrapped in butcher paper, was a small jar, labeled in cursive, reduction, batch 3 modified. A single note was attached. You were right. She overdid the shallot. Wolfe held the jar up to the light, swirled it once and said, finally, and I swear I saw him smile. That night, Fritz prepared duck again. Same cut, same sear, same confidence. But this time, Wolfe insisted we use the sauce from the jar. He didn't explain why. He didn't have to. Halfway through the meal he paused, chewed thoughtfully, then said, Archie, sometimes the dish changes when the cook disappears. I nodded. Sometimes the truth does too. No, Wolfe said quietly, but firmly. The truth stays. Only the authors vanish. We finished the meal in silence. The brownstone, once again, was whole. Dinner was served. The flavors lingered. And the silence, for once, was earned. 3 weeks passed. The phone rang less. The mail got thinner. Even Saul Panzer, who had the instincts of a bloodhound and the timing of a Swiss watch, hadn't dropped by with an envelope or a raised eyebrow in days. Wolfe resumed his routine like the world owed him rhythm. Orchids in the morning, lunch at 1, books from 4 to 6, dinner at 8. And me? I was doing what I always did in the aftermath, waiting for the next fracture in the stillness. Because stillness, as I've learned under Wolfe's roof, never lasts. It came, not in the form of a murder, or a client, or even a culinary catastrophe, but something much quieter, a footstep, a single footstep, outside the brownstone. It was early, 8:10 in the morning, and Wolfe was in the kitchen berating Fritz for something he claimed was too much cardamom in the oatmeal. I tried it, he was wrong. I had just taken up my post at the desk with a cup of coffee, when I heard it, one slow, hesitant step on the porch. Then a knock. 3. Soft. Not the knock of a stranger, not the knock of a salesman, the knock of someone trying not to wake a house and failing. I opened the door. She stood there, wearing a navy coat and a scarf too thin for the season. Same glasses, same watchful eyes, Ginny Pelham. She looked up, blinked once and said, I know I shouldn't be here. I stepped aside. That never stops anyone. We sat in the office, Wolfe still in the kitchen, thank God, and Ginny perched at the edge of the chair, as if she might need to bolt. I offered her coffee. She declined. Her hands were clasped around something in her lap, small, square, wrapped in brown paper. I'm not here to confess, she said, and the way she said it made me believe it. I'm not guilty. Not like Marco, not like Clara, or Cecil, I offered. She tilted her head. Him most of all. So why are you here? She looked down at the wrapped package. To return something. Something I thought I wanted. Until I realized I already had it. Cryptic. I said. She smiled faintly. You learn that from chefs. You learn that from chefs. Wolfe entered then, as if summoned by the scent of enigma. He was dressed in his usual house uniform, canary yellow shirt, brown trousers, a scowl, and stopped halfway into the room. Miss Pelham, he said. Mr. Wolfe, she said. I'm sorry. For returning, or for leaving? She hesitated. For both. He nodded to the package. What is that? She stood, stepped forward, and placed it on his desk. I kept a copy, she said, of the original manuscript. Before the edits, before the publishing deals, before Marina rewrote the ending. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but something in the air did. A faint click of awareness. She doesn't know I have it, Jenny added. But I thought, if someone should read it, it should be you. Wolfe did not reach for it. Instead, he said, why now? Because I've written what I need to write. And I want to forget the rest. I didn't speak. Wolfe didn't either. Finally, she said, you were right, Mr. Wolfe. The fire wasn't destruction. It was an invitation. Then she turned and walked out. No drama, no glance back. Just a woman with her story told and her silence surrendered. We didn't open the package right away. Wolfe placed it in his top drawer, unopened, like a piece of evidence no longer needed, but too important to discard. We both knew what was inside. Marina's truth. Unrefined, unfiltered, and probably a bit bitter. Will you read it? I asked. Hours later. Wolfe shook his head. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. Why? Because it's no longer necessary. She gave it up. You think she gave up the truth? No, Wolfe said. She gave up ownership of it. That was Wolfe at his most philosophical, which usually meant he'd spent too long with orchids and not enough time with arguments. But I understood what he meant. Marina had written a book. Ginny had preserved a memory, and somewhere in between, justice had become memory, and memory had become legend. The next day, I received an envelope. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Marina's. Inside was a single-page letter. Archie, I hear things. The quiet kind. I know she came to see you. I'm not angry. I'm relieved. There are truths that don't belong in the book. But they belong somewhere. And I'd rather they sit in your office than in no office at all. I'm grateful. Yours, Marina. I showed Wolfe. He read it, folded it once, and said, have Fritz prepare the cold roast beef tonight. No mustard. That was Wolfe, for we're done here. Weeks passed. The world moved on. The manuscript stayed in the drawer. One afternoon, as spring began to threaten winter's grip, I sat at my desk, watching the light change over the street, thinking about everything that had passed through our door in the span of a few weeks. Betrayal, confession, smoke, silence. Wolfe spoke then, quietly. She will write another book. I looked up. Marina. He nodded. She cannot help it. Creation is a compulsion. She will cook it down, season it differently, serve it again. That is what she does. Think she'll mention Ginny this time? No. You going to read it? I already have. I gave him a look. You mean the published version? No. The one she gave me the first day. The handprint. The silence. The lie beneath the spice. That was the real manuscript. The rest is garnish. That night, as Fritz cleared our plates, Wolfe lingered in the dining room longer than usual. He reached for a bottle of white Burgundy, rare for him since he considered wine with dinner a distraction, unless it was trout or an unusually forgiving mood, and poured 2 glasses. To the vanished, he said. I raised mine. Which ones? All of them. We drank. The brownstone was quiet. Outside, the city was loud, endless, and full of other people's lies. But inside, for once, the silence tasted clean. And I thought maybe that was what justice looked like. In the end, not punishment, not exposure, but peace. Hard-earned, imperfect, honest, in the ways that mattered, and served. Finally, with nothing on the side. It was raining again the morning the review came out. I'd been watching the drizzle from my desk, sipping coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. When the Times hit the stoop, I brought it in, shaking off water droplets, and turned straight to the culture section, where Wolfe had dog-eared the corner with surgical precision. There it was, bold headline. Center column, The Flavor of Silence, a memoir with bite, reviewed by Leonard Zane. Wolfe was in his chair, legs crossed, eyes shut. His usual posture for pretending he wasn't waiting for anything. I sat and read aloud. Marina rules The Flavor of Silence is less a memoir than a menu of emotional debts, served cold, plated elegantly, and occasionally seasoned with regret. The writing is knife-sharp in places, smoothed with butter in others. But what makes the book stand out is not its culinary insight, it is its restraint. A story told not to confess, but to control. I paused, glancing at Wolfe. Accurate, he said without opening his eyes. Shall I go on? He waved a hand. Rule offers only partial admissions about betrayal, theft, silence, and invites the reader to guess the rest. The result is a memoir that feels more like a tasting menu of emotions than a confession. What's omitted is more important than what's included. The book is as famous for what it doesn't say as for what it does. Wolfe finally opened one eye. And people find that compelling. Apparently. He snorted. What? I asked. I prefer full recipes. I folded the paper, set it aside. You're bothered. I am irritated, he corrected. That omission has become currency. You'd rather she told everything? No, he said. I would rather she had the courage to admit she didn't want to. That was Wolfe all over. Not moralistic, just exacting. If you lied, fine. Just admit you lied. But don't wrap it in rosemary and call it reflection. Late that afternoon, the phone rang. I picked up. It was Saul Penzer. I have a question, he said. Do you still have that second manuscript? The one Ginny dropped off? I do. Why? Because someone tried to access Marina's publisher's archive this morning. A hack attempt. Cyber or physical? Cyber. Sloppy. 2, from a location in Brooklyn. You think it was her? Maybe. Maybe not. But whoever it was knew what to look for. Wolfe was listening by then, and motioned for the phone. I passed it over. Saul, Wolfe said, have you confirmed whether the publisher retained earlier drafts? A pause. Wolfe nodded. Thank you. He hung up. They deleted everything, Wolfe said. On purpose. Not at first. But after Marina submitted her final version, the archives were cleared. At her request, I leaned forward. She's cleaning the kitchen, I said, making sure nothing's left on the prep table. Or Wolfe said, someone else is. I frowned. You think she's hiding from something new? No, Wolfe said. She's hiding from someone else's version. That night, Wolfe summoned me to the office just before dinner. On his desk was the unopened brown paper-wrapped copy Ginny had left. It had remained untouched since her visit, on purpose, Wolfe said. Not because he feared what was in it, but because he wanted to see whether not knowing was more powerful than knowing. Shall we? I asked. He nodded. I peeled off the paper. Inside was the same title, in her handwriting. A heavier notebook. The original, margins stuffed with annotations in 2 hands, Marina's and Ginny's. I flipped through slowly. One line, under a section titled Source as Memory, was underlined 3 times. We never speak of Varson Rule. It was too raw, too rare, too bloody. And yet every dish I make now is seasoned by what I ruined then. Wolfe read it over my shoulder. She never included that in the final. No, I said. She boiled it away. We kept reading. There were footnotes Ginny had added. Questions, counters, the occasional not true scribbled in the margin next to a claim. The manuscript wasn't a memoir. It was an argument. Good God, I murmured. They weren't co-authors. They were combatants. Wolfe smiled faintly. And yet both held the ladle. We came to a page near the back. A handwritten edition. No heading. If she ever publishes this, she'll scrub the salt out of the wound. That's her way. She doesn't lie, but she edits. I don't blame her. But someone should know. Someone should taste it, as it was. Wolfe closed the book. That, he said, is the real reason Ginny left it with us. Insurance. Correction. I sat back. What do we do with it? Wolfe didn't answer. He stared out the window. The following week, Wolfe made a rare move. He wrote a letter, longhand, on his own stationery. That's how I knew it mattered. He addressed it to Marina. Madam, I have read the copy Miss Pelham left with us. It is not my habit to meddle in artistic revision, but I believe it should be clear that what you published is only part of what you wrote. That in itself is not dishonest, but it is selective, and selection is a kind of authorship. If you ever decide to publish a second edition, include Ginny's voice, the one you scrubbed out. The reader deserves to hear the contradiction. Otherwise, the dish tastes of polish, not hunger. Yours, Injustice. Nero Wolfe. He sealed the letter. I mailed it. She never wrote back, but I know she received it. Because, 3 weeks later, a copy of The Flavor of Silence limited annotated edition was listed in a niche food literature catalog, a rare run of 50. Never advertised. Quietly sold. In the annotations, Ginny's notes. Small, tucked into the margins. But there. Wolfe didn't smile when the copy arrived. But he left it on the shelf, visible, upright, beside Larousse Gastronomique, between 2 editions of Brillat Savarin. And in Wolfe's world, that was its own kind of honor. One final thing. A postcard arrived this morning. No return address. No name. Just a photo of a plate duck breast, perfectly seared, fanned over reduction sauce, on the back. You were right about the shallot. Wait. Wolfe read it, then handed it to me. I never doubted it. He said, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is how it ends. No arrests, no bodies, no confession in a locked room, just a woman's voice in the margins, and a dish that finally got the balance right. The rain had stopped. For once, the streets outside the brownstone glistened not with drizzle, but with the kind of clean-swept, calm New York rarely bothered to offer. Wolfe had returned from the plant rooms an hour early, which meant either he had exhausted his grievances with Theodore or the orchids had somehow begun behaving perfectly. Both were unlikely. He was seated in his chair now, a bottle of beer half empty beside him. The annotated edition of The Flavor of Silence resting on the table with its spine unbroken. I knew without asking that he had read it twice. Possibly 3 times. He hadn't said a word about it, not yet. But Wolfe's silence when saturated with thought was louder than most men's lectures. I waited. Eventually he spoke. She did it. Which one? He gave me a look. Marina. I leaned back. You'll need to be a little more specific. She did what? She orchestrated it. Not the fire, not the theft, not even the sabotage, but the narrative. From the moment she walked in here with that folio and that sauce-stained handprint, she knew exactly what she was doing. I said nothing. I wanted him to keep going. She chose the bait. She chose the players. She allowed Clara back into her life. She allowed Cecil to fumble loyally. She gave Marco just enough attention to stir his ambition. And she gave Ginny the silence she craved, knowing that Ginny would eventually fill it. That's a hell of a gamble. No, Wolfe said. It was a recipe, carefully measured. I poured myself a drink. So she planned it all. No, but she anticipated it. And when it happened, when the theft, the fire, the tension began to simmer, she adjusted. She pivoted. Toward what? Toward authorship. Not just of the book, of the story. I nodded slowly. She let them cook the conflict, so she could write the truth with plausible deniability. Precisely. I swirled the glass in my hand. So, she wins. Yes, Wolfe said. But not entirely. I raised an eyebrow. She lost. Ginny. And Ginny, in her absence, changed the flavor of the dish. He gestured to the annotated edition on the table. She tried to reduce the sauce down to something neat. But Ginny left the bones in. That was Wolfe's version of poetry. Do you think she regrets it? I asked. Any of it? No, he said. But she will. That hung in the air for a moment. Then Wolfe shifted in his chair, rare for him, and looked at me with something I'd almost call generosity. Archie, he said, would you write this one down? I blinked. You want me to publish it? No. But it should exist. As it happened, without edit, that was the final verdict. Not just for the case, for all of them. Wolfe, who rarely cared for legacy, was making one small exception, and I understood why. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted. Sometimes it just needs to be written and kept somewhere quiet. So I did. I wrote it, all of it, from the knock at the door to the postcard in the rain, from Marina's poised composure to Ginny's whispered defiance, from the handprint on the cookbook cover to the taste of the sauce no one will ever quite replicate again. No names changed, no flavors muted, just the story, as it was, served cold, but honest. And maybe, in the end, that's the only kind of justice Wolfe ever truly believed in.